You will probably never see the most powerful owner in your life. It doesn't put its name on the door, but it may already own the hospital where you were born, the vet who treats your dog, the apartment you rent, the dentist you see, and the company that signs your paycheck. It's called private equity, and the reason you've never noticed it is the whole point. When it buys something, the sign out front stays the same. The name you trust stays. Only the owner and the math quietly changes. This is not a small corner of the economy. Private equity firms manage somewhere north of $11 trillion. The companies they own employ around 13 million Americans, roughly 1 in 15 private sector workers, and account for about 7% of the entire U.S. economy. They own nursing homes and hospitals, dental chains and vet clinics, apartment complexes and mobile home parks, funeral homes, fertility clinics, even the phone systems inside prisons. Whole slices of daily life, bought quietly, held for a few years, and sold. Now, this isn't a shadowy cabal, and it isn't a conspiracy. It's a legal, ordinary, wildly successful financial model, operating in plain sight. But its genius is that it's nearly invisible. And to understand why that matters, you have to see how the model actually makes its money. Here's the trick at the heart of it. When private equity buys a company, it usually doesn't pay with its own money. It pays mostly with borrowed money and then does something strange. It puts that debt not on itself, but on the company it just bought. Imagine buying a house with a giant mortgage and then legally making the house responsible for the payments. That's a leveraged buyout. The company now owes millions it never borrowed, and it has to earn its own purchase price back, or sink trying. Then the extraction begins. The new owners charge the company management fees. They can force it to take out fresh loans just to pay themselves a dividend. They can even sell the company's own buildings and make it pay rent to keep using them. And here is the part that breaks your intuition. Because the firm pulls its money out early, through fees, dividends, and asset sales, it can walk away with a fat profit even if the company it bought collapses a few years later. You have watched this happen. Toys R Us was a healthy, profitable chain until a buyout buried it under billions in debt. Starved of the cash it needed to compete, it went bankrupt and closed every store. 33,000 people lost their jobs. The firms that loaded on the debt still made money. That's the reframe most people miss. Private equity isn't simply making companies more efficient. Its payout is decoupled from whether the company survives. Sometimes it builds, but it is engineered so the owner can win even when the business and its workers lose. If that model is risky for a toy store, imagine pointing it at something you can't opt out of. Because that is exactly where the money has been flowing. The parts of life where you can't shop around and where the government pays the bill. Healthcare. Private equity's investment in it has grown more than 20-fold in 20 years. Two firms alone control about a third of America's outsourced emergency room doctors. A handful own the air ambulances. Roughly a quarter of fertility clinics are now private equity affiliated. And here the stakes stop being financial. In nursing homes, a landmark study of more than 7 million patients found that private equity ownership raised short-term death rates by about 10%, meaning an estimated 20,000 people likely died who otherwise would not have over a 12-year period. The mechanism wasn't mysterious. Fewer nurses, thinner staffing, costs cut to the bone in a place where staffing is survival. A separate study found that patients undergoing major surgery at hospitals after a private equity takeover were about 17% more likely to die within 3 months. Then there's Steward, once the largest for-profit hospital chain in America, taken over by a private equity firm that sold off the hospital's land and made them pay rent. Its investors reportedly pulled out hundreds of millions. Its chief executive took home $250 million. In 2024, Steward collapsed into bankruptcy with over $9 billion in liabilities, and hospitals across several states shut their doors. These aren't cherry-picked horror stories. They're some of the most careful research we have. Large samples, government data, controlling for how sick the patients already were. That is what makes healthcare the hardest part of this story to wave away. And yet, it would be dishonest to end there because the picture is genuinely mixed. Not every buyout is a strip and flip. Most private equity-backed companies are small businesses. Many get capital and expertise they couldn't find anywhere else, and they grow. The average worker at these firms earns a solid wage, and the industry pays hundreds of billions in taxes. But there's a deeper twist, one that turns this whole story back on itself. Where do the trillions that private equity invests actually come from? A huge share of it comes from pension funds, the retirement savings of teachers, firefighters, nurses, and public workers. More than 30 million American public servants are counting on pensions that pour money into private equity, chasing the high returns it promises. Which means the model is funded in large part by the very people it can hurt. Sit with the full circle of it. A nurse's pension helps fund the firm that buys her hospital, loads it with debt, cuts her staffing, and pays itself a dividend. She is, in the smallest and most invisible way, an owner of the machine that is squeezing her. That's why this is so hard to fight. There's no villain twirling a mustache in a tower. There's a system where almost everyone, investors, pension boards, retirees, is quietly on the same side of the trade, right up until they become the customer on the losing end. The honest conclusion isn't that private equity is evil. It's that when you point a model built for extraction at things people can't live without, their hospital, their home, their care, the incentives and the human stakes come apart. And the bill lands on whoever's too sick, too poor, or too tired to shop around. The reason you never see the owner isn't a conspiracy. It's that the owner is deliberately, structurally out of frame, behind the familiar sign, inside your pension, wearing the face of the business you already trusted. So the next time a hospital quietly cuts its night shift, or a beloved store drowns in sudden debt, or your rent jumps for reasons no one will explain, don't just ask what happened. Ask who owns it now. Because somewhere behind the name you know, there is almost certainly a name you don't. And it may be holding a piece of your future twice. Once as the thing it bought, and once as the money it bought it with.